$5 billion, that was the wealth of James Rothschild by 1825, a staggering sum that exceeded the combined treasuries of Europe's great powers. Yet, his true power resided not in gold, but in velocity. While the British government waited in suspense for news from Waterloo, James already possessed the outcome 24 more hours ahead of time, thanks to a private intelligence syndicate that outpaced every official diplomatic channel of the era. To control information was to control the world. Today, we analyze how a Jewish refugee weaponized the flow of information to master the finances of the entire continent, an unprecedented financial machine. The scale was staggering by the height of his career. The Rothschild banking enterprise spanned 5 capitals: London, Vienna, Naples, St. Petersburg, and Paris, operated by 5 coordinated brothers functioning as a singular financial machine capable of upholding or shattering governments with a single, synchronized decision. This is the chronicle of how a Jewish refugee became the most formidable financier in European history, and how he deployed that immense power to salvage the very nation whose protracted wars had inadvertently financed his rise. But this immense power wasn't just built on talent. It was governed by a strict, non-negotiable family code. Mayor Amschiel established rules that the family followed for generations. All major business decisions required consensus among the brothers to prevent any one member from destroying the family wealth. Furthermore, only male heirs could inherit and control the business, keeping wealth concentrated across generations. Most critically, they pioneered financial privacy, valuing discretion over visibility, which protected their assets during revolutions and social upheavals. In October 1812, the stagecoach bearing James de Rothschild into Paris traversed thoroughfares congested with maimed soldiers returning from the disastrous Russian campaign. French public journals still boldly proclaimed Napoleon's triumphant advances, but James possessed contrary information delivered via the family's private intelligence web. His brother Nathan's agents in London reported devastating French casualties. Simultaneously, Austrian contacts confirmed that Napoleon had deserted his army and fled Moscow under an assumed identity. This critical disparity between public propaganda and proprietary intelligence became the bedrock of James's future prosperity. While Parisians celebrated imaginary glories, he was strategically positioning the family's consolidated banking resources in preparation for France's inevitable fiscal collapse. At only 20 years old, the youngest of the 5 Rothschild brothers, James carried credentials far exceeding his age. Concealed within the lining of his coat were letters of credit valued at 400,000 francs, equivalent to roughly $2 million today. Stashed in his luggage were gold coins from 6 different nations, selected specifically for their guaranteed value, regardless of which political faction ruled Paris. Most importantly, he carried detailed directives from his father outlining the establishment of the family's most audacious operation yet, a bank designed to serve all belligerents in Europe's sprawling conflicts simultaneously. The Paris that James entered was a study in paradox. Grand boulevards led to magnificent palaces, yet the stench of civil unrest and bread riots permeated the working-class district. Imperial guards paraded in impeccable uniforms, even as government ministers privately tallied staggering national debts. Napoleon's empire dominated territories stretching from Spain to Poland, yet French treasury bonds traded at a 40% discount, reflecting investor anxiety over the emperor's ability to service his obligations. James secured modest lodgings in the Marais district, deliberately selecting a spot near both the major financial hub and the established Jewish quarter. This placement was calculated, close enough to government ministries and major banks to execute transactions, yet rooted in a community well-versed in the mechanics of survival under state-sanctioned prejudice. The Rothschilds had mastered the art of being both visible enough to attract lucrative clients and discreet enough to evade perilous attention. His inaugural business meeting was with Gabriel Julien Ouvrard, Napoleon's chief financial contractor and one of the few Parisian bankers truly versed in international currency movements. Ouvrard commanded government contracts worth millions, but faced a critical, immediate challenge. Napoleon's forces required immediate payment in local currencies across dozens of occupied zones, and conventional banking mechanisms were too sluggish and prohibitively expensive for wartime demands. James offered what seemed impossible. The Rothschild network could transfer funds from Paris to troops in Poland, Austria, Spain, or Italy within 2 weeks, significantly faster than official state communication. Crucially, they could supply local tender in any occupied region without the hazardous physical transport of gold across active battle zones. They guaranteed payment stability even amidst radical military shifts. Ouvrard expressed profound skepticism. How could a 20-year-old Jewish émigré possibly guarantee financial operations that surpass the capabilities of Europe's most ancient banking dynasties? James responded not with rhetoric, but with a real-time demonstration of his system's efficacy. He immediately penned a request to his brother Nathan in London, demanding an instantaneous transfer of 50 000 francs to Ouvrard's agent, stationed in Amsterdam. Within 10 days, Ouvrard's man in Amsterdam confirmed receipt of the funds, a feat achieved during a period when French and Dutch banks were barely communicating due to intense wartime hostilities. The successful demonstration convinced Ouvrard, but it also unveiled the true proposition. James wasn't merely offering banking services. He was granting access to a transnational financial infrastructure that ignored political upheavals, national boundaries, and military conflicts. For an empire attempting to finance massive military logistics across an entire continent, this capability was utterly invaluable. The first significant contract materialized in December 1812. Napoleon desperately needed 2 million francs transferred to his forces retreating from the Russian front. But conventional routes through Germany and Poland were paralyzed by military movements. James proposed an intricate alternative. Rothschild agents in Vienna and Hamburg would provide immediate cash payment to the French troops, while James received equivalent value in highly discounted Parisian government bonds. The transaction necessitated zero physical movement of gold, eliminating vulnerable shipments across contested territories and avoiding reliance on cooperation with hostile forces. But James added a strategic innovation that would define all future Rothschild operations. Instead of accepting payment solely in French currency, he negotiated for a mixed portfolio, part French bonds, part physical gold, part Austrian currency, and part British pounds sterling. This radical diversification guaranteed that no matter the ultimate outcome of the war, the Rothschild network was positioned to profit. The strategy proved spectacularly effective, but it simultaneously generated new dangers. French financial authorities began scrutinizing how this recently arrived foreign banker could guarantee international transfers that established French houses could not. Anti-Semitic tabloids questioned the loyalty of Jewish financiers entrusted with military funds. Military generals complained that their operational payment schedules hinged on the decisions of men they considered unwelcome outsiders. James's counter-strategy was to render himself utterly indispensable, rather than attempting to remain invisible. When French commanders required emergency financing for unexpected maneuvers, he delivered it instantaneously. When government ministers needed discreet payments to secure crucial alliances, he managed the arrangements silently and without question. When Napoleon's own relatives sought personal lines of credit for extravagant spending, James accommodated them with generous terms. Each service rendered exponentially increased governmental dependency. French officials quickly realized that operations that previously required months could be executed in mere weeks through Rothschild channels. Military strategists discovered that financial bottlenecks that had previously halted campaigns could be solved with a single conversation. Ministers understood that diplomatic initiatives requiring complex, multinational financial backing could be implemented through one coordinated banking system. By early 1813, James's operation transcended simple currency exchange. He was supplying intelligence regarding economic conditions across Europe, facilitating covert diplomatic payments between formally hostile governments, and coordinating complex financial instruments that allowed France to sustain warfare even as traditional credit sources dried up. The transformation was breathtaking. The refugee who had arrived in Paris 18 months prior was now a participant in strategic meetings with Napoleon's finance ministers. The outsider, viewed initially with deep suspicion, was now consulted regarding major state financial decisions. The 21-year-old banker was coordinating transactions that surpassed the annual budgets of most European nations. But James held a deeper understanding than his clients realized. Every service he supplied, every problem he solved, every dependency he engineered was strategically positioning the Rothschild network for the inevitable moment of Napoleon's imperial collapse. While he meticulously financed the French war effort, his brothers were simultaneously providing functionally identical services to Austria, Prussia, Britain, and Russia. When the wars finally concluded, the Rothschild family would be absolutely essential to all sides, and therefore safe from elimination by any side. The true genius lay not in selecting the eventual winner, but in ensuring that whoever won would require Rothschild banks to finance the subsequent peace. By the summer of 1813, James had definitively uncovered the secret that would establish the Rothschild family as the wealthiest dynasty in European history. War was the most profitable enterprise on earth, provided one understood how to sell to everyone simultaneously. Napoleon's devastating defeat at Leipzig in October 1813 engineered precisely the sort of financial pandemonium James had anticipated. As the emperor retreated toward France, relentlessly pursued by a coalition of adversaries, traditional banking structures imploded under the strain of serving multiple, conflicting national interests. Austrian banks couldn't process payments to their British allies. Prussian financial houses couldn't execute transactions with their Russian partners. French banks were, naturally, utterly unable to facilitate any deals with Napoleon's enemies. The Rothschild network was unburdened by such limitation. Through careful political positionings, James had established the family banks as genuinely neutral financial intermediaries institutions capable of executing highly sensitive transactions between enemies precisely because they lacked political alignment with any singular government. This neutrality was not accidental. It was the calculated result of months of intricate relationship cultivation with all involved parties. James's critical breakthrough arrived when the coalition forces occupying eastern France required an utterly impossible financial mechanism. The Prussian army needed immediate cash payment for their troops, yet Prussia's national treasury was depleted. Britain had pledged the necessary funding, but British gold could not safely traverse the military lines to reach Prussian forces. Austria was prepared to advance the funds, but only with categorical guarantees from London. Russia demanded payment specifically in rubles, which no bank in occupied France could. Traditional diplomacy would have demanded weeks of intercapital negotiations. formal treaties, complex bureaucratic approvals, and high-risk shipments of gold across contested lands. James offered a streamlined solution. The Rothschild banks would instantaneously pay Prussian soldiers using local French currency, collect reimbursement from British accounts held in London, provide the necessary Austrian guarantees through the Vienna branch, and manage the final Russian ruble transactions via St. Petersburg connections. The entire complex operation could be completed in mere days, not months. The desperate coalition commanders agreed to the experiment, but demanded immediate proof of James's audacious guarantee. His demonstration was spectacular. He arranged for 500 francs to be paid to Prussian officers in Nancy, while simultaneously coordinating the equivalent value transfer from London to Vienna and from Vienna to St. Petersburg. The payments were successfully finalized in 8 days, despite involving 4 distinct currencies, 3 different governments, and military zones controlled by hostile forces. Word of this miraculous transaction rippled quickly through coalition headquarters. If a single Jewish banker could instantly resolve financial dilemmas that had paralyzed military operations, what other feats might the Rothschild network achieve? Within weeks, James was managing the payroll for British subsidies directed toward German allies, facilitating Austrian loans to Italian resistance fighters, and coordinating complex currency exchanges that enabled Russian forces to acquire necessary provisions in occupied French territory. Each successful transaction generated enormous profits. But, more critically, it established essential precedents coalition commanders began to accept as standard operating procedure that complex international payments flowed through Rothschild banks. Diplomatic treaties began incorporating financial provisions that only the Rothschild network possessed the capacity to execute. Military planning began relying on assumptions about funding availability that hinged entirely on James's continued cooperation. The operational scope was stunning. By early 1814, James was processing over 20 million francs in international payments monthly, equivalent to approximately $100 million in today's currency. His client roster included British intelligence operatives funding resistance movements, Austrian generals financing local allies, Prussian commanders procuring military necessities, and Russian officials securing political backing in captured French regions. But James's most lucrative innovation was his approach to currency speculation, rooted in his intelligence advantage. While other bankers merely reacted to unfolding political events, James anticipated them, courtesy of the family network. When coalition forces approached Paris, he knew before the French defenders. When Napoleon consented to abdicate, James received the information before official government declarations. When the Bourbon monarchy was restored, he held advanced knowledge of the forthcoming policy shifts and personnel changes. This preemptive information advantage allowed James to perfectly position himself for every significant political transition. Before Napoleon's abdication was publicly announced, he had already quietly liquidated massive quantities of French government bonds, while simultaneously acquiring British pounds and Austrian currency. Before the Bourbon Restoration, he had acquired French government securities at severely discounted prices. Before coalition forces fully withdrew from French soil, he had established new credit arrangements with returning French officials who would soon require essential international banking facilities. The resulting profits were astronomical, but they were accompanied by immense daily risk. James was simultaneously managing the financial logistics for governments technically engaged in total warfare against one another. French royalist agents utilized Rothschild banks to receive British subsidies, while British intelligence services used the very same banks to pay Austrian informants. And Austrian officials utilized Rothschild networks to coordinate with Prussian allies fighting on French land. A single operational error, a security lapse, or a political miscalculation could have resulted in James's immediate arrest as a spy, execution as a traitor, or simple murder by any of the competing factions operating within occupied France. His sole defense was his proven value to all sides and his consistent ability to persuade each client that their confidential financial secrets were entirely safe from their enemies. James executed this treacherous balancing act through a dual strategy of stringent compartmentalization and strategic transparency. Every government knew he worked with their allies, but none knew the full extent of his operations with their enemies. British officials understood that James facilitated payments to Austrian forces, but remained ignorant of his arrangements with French royalists. Coalition commanders knew of his currency exchange capabilities, but not his comprehensive intelligence gathering activities. The fundamental key was supplying each client with only the precise information they needed, while rigorously withholding everything they did not. When British agents requested details on French royalist funding, James provided meticulous reports on payments and recipients. When coalition generals inquired about local currency availability, he gave accurate data on exchange rates and supply sources. When French officials sought insight into coalition payment structures, he offered analyses that were helpful, but intentionally incomplete. This selective disclosure demanded extraordinary memory and organizational capacity. James maintained detailed records of every transaction, but those records were meticulously coded to prevent any single document from revealing the overall scope of the enterprise. Client communications were deliberately composed in language that seemed routine to outsiders, but conveyed precise meaning to the intended recipients. Financial agreements were architected to appear legally sound under multiple national jurisdictions, while actually serving broader, secret purposes that often violated various national statutes. By the time Napoleon was definitively defeated and exiled to Elba in April 1814, James had solidified the Rothschild banks as the only financial institution in Europe capable of managing complex international transactions involving numerous currencies and multiple governments. Traditional banks were limited to single-country operations or simple bilateral agreements. The Rothschild network could coordinate sophisticated multilateral financial instruments that served political, military, and commercial goals simultaneously. The infrastructure was now established for James's next strategic phase, leveraging the family's deep wartime relationships to achieve absolute dominance over European finance during peacetime. The governments that had relied on Rothschild services during the crisis would soon discover they needed those same services to finance reconstruction, manage crushing war debts, facilitate trade relationships, and underpin economic development. War had proven profitable, but the peace would be even more lucrative, especially for the only banking network that all sides trusted to handle their most sensitive financial necessities. The Rothschilds' edge was never just capital, it was the weaponization of information asymmetry. James transformed the family courier system into a high-velocity intelligence syndicate that functioned faster than imperial diplomacies. By disguising agents as routine merchants and establishing relay stations across Europe, he ensured that while governments moved at a civilian pace, the Rothschilds operated at the speed of light. This wasn't just about knowing the news, it was about monetizing intelligence products, selling synthesized data to multiple hostile governments simultaneously, ensuring that, regardless of who won on the battlefield, the Rothschilds owned the information that governed the peace. James's singular innovation was developing intelligence products designed to serve multiple clients simultaneously. To deliver these products, He engineered a courier system of unprecedented sophistication. Primary couriers carried official reports along the fastest known routes, while secondary and emergency couriers followed alternate paths to ensure message continuity. The network's core power resided in dedicated relay stations disguised as legitimate commercial facilities in trading posts or customs houses where couriers could instantly change horses without sacrificing momentum. This infrastructural investment was immense, with operations often costing over 200,000 francs, roughly $1 million today, transforming information into a high-velocity currency that moved faster than imperial diplomacies. The identical set of data concerning coalition military movements could be packaged as a political risk assessment for French officials, a currency speculation guide for London bankers, and a trade route analysis for Austrian merchants. This monetization strategy allowed James to profit from the intelligence multiple times over, while simultaneously cultivating relationships with diverse, powerful clients. French royalists paid for reports detailing coalition political intentions. British agents purchased assessments of French public opinion. Austrian diplomats acquired analyses of Prussian negotiating stances. Every client received valuable information, while James, in turn, gathered invaluable intelligence about their respective priorities and activities. The network's first major public success occurred during the Congress of Vienna, 1814 to 1815. While European leaders engaged in public negotiations to determine the post-Napoleonic political map, James's agents provided continuous, real-time reporting on secret caucuses, private agendas, personal rivalries, and hidden objectives. Traditional diplomatic intelligence was confined to formal government-to-government communications. The Rothschild network penetrated informal channels. Servants in diplomatic residences, clerks managing confidential files, merchants supplying conference facilities, and bankers processing official expense payments. James received detailed reports on which delegates were meeting privately, what territorial concessions were being considered behind closed doors, which nations were forging secret alliances, and how public negotiating positions diverged from actual strategic objectives. This information superiority allowed James to anticipate market-moving political developments weeks before any official announcement. When secret territorial agreements were finalized, he strategically positioned himself to capitalize on the predictable currency fluctuations that followed public disclosure. When military alliance terms were privately negotiated, he prepared for changes in government funding requirements that would immediately impact bond prices. The commercial advantage was vast. European financial markets during this era were primitive. Price information traveled slowly. Transaction costs were high, and market predictions were based on limited, delayed data. James's intelligence system provided an insurmountable edge in currency speculation, government bond trading, and structuring international credit facilities. But the true power of the network resided in its capacity to influence events, not merely forecast them. James discovered that information could be weaponized. Selective disclosure could shape political negotiations. Strategic misinformation could manipulate financial markets, and coordinated reporting could steer public opinion. During the 100 Days Crisis, when Napoleon returned from Elba in March 1815, James demonstrated this chilling capability. His network possessed advanced intelligence regarding Napoleon's landing in France. Instead of reporting this instantly to coalition forces, James carefully managed the information flow to maximize his financial opportunity. First, he discreetly sold enormous quantities of French government bonds while buying British and Austrian securities. Next, he allowed curated intelligence to leak to coalition commanders, triggering a panic in European financial centers that drove French bond prices even lower. Finally, he provided complete intelligence reports to British and Austrian officials, solidifying his status as their most critical information source, while simultaneously positioning the family banks to profit handsomely from whatever political outcome emerged. This strategy demanded extraordinary timing and nerve. James had to simultaneously navigate multiple competing loyalties while managing information flows that possess the capacity to determine the outcome of major historical events. Sharing too much intelligence too quickly would devalue his services to clients. Sharing too little too slowly would erode his credibility. Sharing the wrong intelligence with the wrong parties could result in exposure, arrest, or death. James mitigated these risks through meticulous compartmentalization and systematic redundancy. No single agent ever possessed a complete overview of the network's operations. Multiple sources corroborated intelligence on critical developments to avoid dependence on any individual. Client relationships were structured to ensure that each government valued Rothschild services sufficiently to shield James, even if they discovered his financial dealings with their adversaries. The network also maintained sophisticated counterintelligence capabilities. James's agents constantly monitored government investigations into his activities, tracked officials who harbored suspicion of foreign banking operations, identified potential security compromises, and reported on competing intelligence networks that might jeopardize Rothschild interests. This defensive intelligence was vital, as foreign bankers in France constantly faced suspicion. French nationalism fueled hostility toward German financial houses. Endemic anti-Semitic sentiment generated suspicion toward Jewish commercial activities. Coalition military governments were perpetually wary of international financial operations that might secretly benefit enemy interests. James survived these threats by proving himself simply too valuable to eliminate. When French officials scrutinized his intelligence gathering, they found that his reports on coalition intentions helped France secure more favorable negotiating terms. When coalition commanders questioned his loyalty, he discovered his financial services were absolutely essential to their military logistics. When rival banking firms attempted to undermine him, they realized they could not replicate his international operational capabilities. By the time the Congress of Vienna concluded in June 1815, James had permanently established the Rothschild banks as the premier financial institution in Europe, capable of managing complex, multilateral transactions involving multiple governments and currencies. The traditional boundaries separating banking from intelligence, commercial endeavors from political operations, and national loyalty from international business had been irrevocably erased. The intelligence system James forged during this period would continue to operate for decades, providing the crucial foundation for Rothschild financial dominance across the continent. Governments that had relied on Rothschild information during the war discovered they needed the same intelligence services during peacetime. Political leaders who had used Rothschild banks for sensitive wartime transfers continued to depend on those services for routine governance. Information had become the Rothschilds' most valuable commodity, more critical than gold, more powerful than military strength, and more durable than fleeting political authority. March 1815 brought the ultimate crisis that would define James Rothschild's legacy. Napoleon Bonaparte had engineered his escape from Elba and was rapidly marching toward Paris, attracting adherents who believed the emperor could resurrect French glory. Europe suddenly faced the terrifying prospect of renewed continental warfare, just as the coalition forces were demobilizing and transitioning to peaceful reconstruction. For the vast majority of European bankers, Napoleon's return represented an unacceptable level of risk, government bonds plummeted as investors scrambled towards safer, tangible assets. International trade froze as merchants rescinded contracts dependent on political stability. Traditional banking institutions retreated into purely defensive postures, seeking to protect existing capital rather than seize new opportunities. James recognized something profoundly different: the greatest financial opening in European history. While his peers succumbed to panic, he recognized that Napoleon's resurgence created extraordinary demand for the precise services that only the Rothschild network was equipped to deliver. Both sides in the looming conflict would require instant access to international capital, sophisticated currency exchange, and superior intelligence concerning enemy capabilities. The immediate challenge was positioning himself to serve both antagonists simultaneously without appearing to betray either. Conventional neutrality was insufficient. The political stakes were too high for governments to tolerate a genuinely impartial partner. Instead, James had to convince each side he was their deeply committed ally, while secretly providing essential services to their enemies. His solution was an act of masterful deception. To Napoleon's newly restored government, James presented himself as a patriotic French banker who had diligently built international capabilities strictly for the benefit of French state interests. His agent network could supply critical intelligence on coalition activities. His relationships with foreign banks could facilitate rapid French government borrowing. His currency expertise could assist France in financing military mobilization done across Europe. To the coalition forces, James portrayed himself as an indispensable international financier who merely operated a branch in Paris, but remained resolutely loyal to the broader interests of European stability. His intelligence system could monitor French military preparations. His financial services could coordinate the coalition's complex funding for joint military operations. His local knowledge could prove invaluable to occupation forces once they inevitably captured French territory. Both narratives were technically accurate, yet neither disclosed the full truth. James was indeed developing international capabilities that could serve French interests, and he was simultaneously developing services that would benefit coalition forces. He was gathering intelligence on coalition activities, which he shared with French officials, while providing intelligence on French activities to coalition commanders. This calculated deception required phenomenal operational security. James maintained completely separate ledgers, distinct communication channels, isolated agent networks, and separate client management systems for each side. French officials visiting his office saw only evidence of the French banking operations, never the reports destined for the coalition. Coalition agents who met with James received detailed briefings on French activities, but never learned of his services to Napoleon's regime. Napoleon's triumphant entry into Paris on March 20th, 1815, triggered immediate financial emergencies that tested James's capabilities to their limit. The emperor required rapid funding to rebuild his shattered army. Yet traditional French banks were profoundly hesitant to extend credit to a regime widely expected to be crushed by the coalition response. Foreign banks were entirely unwilling to offer any credit whatsoever to Napoleon following his previous disasters. James offered Napoleon what no other banker could: instant access to international capital markets via the Rothschild network. French government bonds might be worthless on Parisian exchanges, but James could convert them to Austrian currency via the Vienna branch, exchange Austrian currency for British pounds through London operations, and then use the resulting British capital to procure vital military supplies from neutral merchants. These transactions were complex and exceptionally costly. James charged significant premiums for assuming the enormous systemic risks involved. But they supplied Napoleon with financial resources that were otherwise wholly inaccessible. Within days of seizing power, the emperor had secured funding that enabled him to pay his soldiers, purchase new weapons, and begin mobilizing for renewed military campaigns. Yet, James was simultaneously providing equivalent services to Napoleon's mortal enemies. Coalition commanders desperately needed intelligence on French military movements, rapid currency exchange for international payments, and financial structures to coordinate their response. The Rothschild network delivered all three, while meticulously concealing the fact that they were also servicing French interests. The intelligence James provided to coalition forces was particularly vital because it originated from sources deep inside Napoleon's inner circle. French diplomatic initiatives, military planning, resource assessments, and strategic decisions were reported to coalition headquarters almost as fast as they were communicated to French field commanders. Napoleon's government never once suspected that their seemingly loyal banker was simultaneously servicing their enemies. This disbelief persisted because James provided genuinely valuable services to French interests. His intelligence reports concerning coalition activities helped French diplomats understand enemy intentions. His financial services enabled French military operations that would have been impossible through conventional banking avenues. His political assessments aided Napoleon's advisors in developing crisis management strategies. The arrangement proved profitable for everyone involved, except the hundreds of thousands of soldiers who would die fighting battles that might have been avoided had either side possessed a complete, accurate picture of their opponent's true capabilities and intentions. James collected lucrative fees from French government borrowing while simultaneously earning commissions on coalition financial coordination. He was compensated for supplying intelligence to French officials while receiving separate, generous payments for delivering intelligence to coalition commanders. The ethical implications were immense. James was financially facilitating military logistics for both sides of a conflict projected to kill hundreds of thousands of people. He provided financial mechanisms that allowed armies to fight longer and more effectively. He delivered intelligence that helped both sides formulate more destructive military plans. Yet, from James's professional perspective, the arrangement was justifiable on multiple grounds. First, he was not attempting to predetermine the victor. He was simply fulfilling the demand for essential financial services that both sides required, regardless of the conflict's outcome. Second, he did not instigate the war. He was merely responding to the existing demand for banking services necessitated by political leaders choosing warfare as their means of dispute resolution. Third, he argued that he was potentially reducing the conflict's duration and intensity by ensuring both sides had access to reasonably accurate information regarding their enemy's true military strength. The most morally complex facet of James's operations was his direct impact on military strategy. Coalition commanders who received detailed intelligence on French preparations could devise superior strategies for defeating Napoleon. French officials who learned about coalition capabilities could make more informed decisions about whether continued resistance was truly viable. In theory, this mutual information transparency should have shortened the conflict by forcing both sides to confront military reality. In practice, the intelligence sometimes allowed both sides to wage war more effectively, prolonging battles that might have swiftly concluded had one side held decisive. Uncountered superiority. James navigated these ethical ambiguities by strictly focusing on financial, rather than political, objectives. He was not striving to decide who would rule Europe. He was constructing a banking network prepared to serve whoever ultimately won. He was not attempting to influence military outcomes. He was strategically positioning himself to maximize profit from whatever political settlement eventually emerged from the chaos. This approach required James to maintain a profound emotional detachment from events that were violently reshaping European civilization. While others celebrated triumphs or mourned losses, he analyzed every development solely in terms of its impact on financial markets and banking opportunities. While others cultivated passionate loyalties to political ideologies, he maintained purely professional relationships with clients, regardless of their ideological commitment. The strategy reached its ultimate test as Napoleon's army moved toward the decisive confrontation that everyone knew would determine the emperor's destiny. European financial markets were paralyzed by profound uncertainty. Traditional banking operations had virtually ceased as investors nervously awaited news that could either validate or destroy entire governments. James prepared for what he understood would be the single most important financial opportunity in European history. The battle that would end Napoleon's career would simultaneously determine which banking network would dominate European finance for the next generation. June 15, 1815, while Europe's professional armies converged on Belgium for the battle that would seal Napoleon's fate, James Rothschild was meticulously executing the most audacious intelligence operation ever conceived in financial history. The Rothschild courier network was primed to deliver information that would generate profits exceeding the annual budgets of major European nations. The plan was elegant in its operational simplicity. James had deployed specialized agents throughout the battle zone, not to influence the military outcome, but to immediately observe and report the results. The moment decisive action concluded, Rothschild couriers would carry the news toward London faster than any official government communication system. James's brother, Nathan, would receive the final battle outcome before British government officials, before stock exchange operators, before newspaper publishers, before anyone else who might trade upon the information. Conventional communication between the continent and Britain required multiple days, even under optimal conditions. Official dispatches were routed through military channels that prioritized security over speed. Commercial messages relied on standard postal services that moved at a civilian pace. The Rothschild network had spent months developing covert, high-velocity routes that prioritized sheer speed above all else. James's tactical masterstroke involved recruiting agents capable of penetrating military zones strictly forbidden to civilian observers. These were not traditional spies seeking military secrets. They were intelligence specialists focused entirely on gathering data with enormous commercial value but zero strategic military significance. Knowing which army won the battle did little to help the losing side fight better, but it could generate colossal profits for investors who preemptively positioned themselves before the public announcement. Traditional banking houses would never have justified such expenses for speculative returns. But James understood that information, delivered at the critical moment to the right recipient, possessed value far exceeding any physical commodity. On June 18, 1815, as Wellington's forces clashed with Napoleon near Waterloo, James's agents were strategically positioned throughout the operational zone. They monitored not just the main engagement, but also subsidiary actions that might influence the result. Prussian flanking movements that could reinforce Wellington, French reserve deployments that might change the balance, and supply issues that would determine which army could sustain the fight longest. By late afternoon, the battle's definitive outcome was apparent. Napoleon's final cavalry charge had faltered. French forces were in fully panicked retreat. Wellington and Blücher had secured a decisive victory. The emperor's political career was terminated, and his remaining adherents faced inevitable military occupation by coalition forces. James's primary courier, a professional horseman named Rothworth, departed the battlefield at 00 p.m. carrying complete, verified intelligence of the French defeat. He rode toward Ostend, using routes James's agents had scouted weeks earlier. Switching horses at dedicated Rothschild stations prepared for maximum speed travel toward the British coast. The journey that normally required 2 days was completed in just 18 hours. Rothworth reached Ostend on June 19th at noon, carrying news that would not reach London through official channels for at least another full day. A swift Rothschild packet boat awaited him at the harbor, crewed by sailors who understood that speed was non-negotiable. Weather conditions were ideal for a channel crossing, and the Rothschild boat reached Dover in 4 hours. Nathan Rothschild received the detailed intelligence confirming Napoleon's defeat at Aden at 00 p.m. on June 19th, more than 24 hours before government officials would learn the battle's outcome. But Nathan's genius lay in the deployment of this superior information. Instead of immediately buying British government bonds, which would instantly signal his knowledge to other market participants, he began the trading day on June 20th by conspicuously selling massive quantities of British securities. Other traders, concluding that Nathan, the famously well-informed financier, must have received disastrous news about Wellington's campaigns, immediately followed his lead and commenced a panicked liquidation of British investments. British bond prices collapsed instantly as widespread panic swept through London financial markets. Investors who had supported the war effort against Napoleon watched their holdings lose 20%, then 30%, then 40% of their face value in a matter of hours. The selling frenzy became self-reinforcing as traders rushed to minimize losses by liquidating positions before prices fell further. Nathan allowed the panic to intensify throughout the morning, selling just enough British securities to maintain the downward price pressure, while secretly instructing agents to purchase colossal quantities of the discounted bonds through intermediaries who could not be traced back to Rothschild operations. By noon, when the selling panic reached maximum intensity, Nathan had accumulated British government debt with a face value exceeding £20 million, equivalent to roughly $2 billion today. At 2:00 p.m., official news of Wellington's decisive victory finally reached London via government dispatch. British bond prices instantly rocketed upward as investors realized their panicked selling had been predicated on a false assumption. Traders who had sold securities in the morning desperately attempted to repurchase them in the afternoon, driving prices to levels even higher than they had been before the panic began. Nathan's profit was conservatively estimated at over £1 million, equivalent to approximately $100 million in today's currency, generated in a single day through the lethal combination of superior intelligence and deliberate market manipulation. But the financial repercussions extended far beyond the immediate trading gains. The Rothschild network had demonstrated capabilities that no other banking house could rival: information delivery systems superior to official government communication, market influence capable of moving prices independently of fundamental value, and synchronized coordination between different national markets that allowed for massive profit extraction from temporary price discrepancies. Most critically, the Waterloo operation firmly established the Rothschild banks as the only financial institution in Europe with dependable access to information that dictated market outcomes. government officials requiring intelligence on political shifts, military commanders needing information on enemy activities, and investors seeking advanced knowledge of market-moving events, all discovered that the Rothschild network provided intelligence services that were faster, more comprehensive, and demonstrably more reliable than any available alternative. James's Paris operation became the clearinghouse for this burgeoning intelligence empire. Information streamed into Paris from Rothschild agents across Europe, was analyzed and custom packaged for diverse clients, and then distributed through channels that served both commercial and political objectives. French officials received intelligence regarding coalition activities that helped them comprehend international dynamics. Coalition commanders gained information about French internal political conditions that aided their occupation planning. Investors purchased market analysis that incorporated political intelligence unavailable from other sources. The revenues generated by these intelligence services often surpassed profits derived from traditional banking operations. Governments paid substantial fees for reports that guided policy decisions. Military commanders compensated the Rothschild network for intelligence that enhanced their operational effectiveness. Investors who received preemptive information about political events that would impact financial markets willingly paid premium prices for such invaluable services. By the close of 1815, James had fundamentally transformed the family banking network into something unprecedented in European history, a financial institution that derived as much value from its control over information as it did from its possession of capital. Traditional banks earned money by lending funds at higher interest rates than they paid depositors. The Rothschild network generated profits by monetizing proprietary intelligence that other institutions lacked the capacity to collect, analyze, or distribute. Information had become the family's primary competitive advantage, and James was now perfectly positioned to dominate European finance through superior knowledge rather than superior capital alone. European trade routes would immediately reopen because no significant French forces remained to threaten commercial shipping. Most critically, James understood that post-war reconstruction would demand colossal international funding that traditional banking houses could not supply. European governments required loans to pay coalition armies, rebuild shattered infrastructure, establish new political administrative bodies, and manage the complex economic shift from wartime production to peacetime commerce. The sheer magnitude of these requirements overwhelmed the capacity of single-country banks, but the Rothschild network possessed the unique ability to coordinate international financial arrangements that served multiple governments simultaneously. The opportunity was immense, but it necessitated James rapidly adjusting his operational focus. During the Napoleonic Wars, the Rothschild banks profited by serving all sides in active conflicts. Now, they had to evolve into peacetime institutions, capable of financing reconstruction while meticulously maintaining the delicate political relationships cultivated during the war. James's strategy was to render the Rothschild network absolutely indispensable to the new European political architecture. Instead of simply providing financial services to governments that requested them, he would preemptively anticipate funding requirements and offer solutions before problems escalated into crises. Instead of competing with conventional banks for routine business, he would focus exclusively on complex international transactions that other institutions simply could not execute. The final reparations arrangement definitively established the Rothschild network as the paramount financial intermediary for post-war European reconstruction. Governments that had depended on Rothschild services during wartime found those same capabilities necessary during peacetime. Military commanders who had used Rothschild intelligence during campaigns required similar information for occupation administration. Political leaders who had relied on Rothschild coordination during crises realized they needed those services for routine governance. But James's most transformative innovation was his strategic approach to government bond markets. Traditional government borrowing was limited to domestic investors capable of evaluating local political conditions and currency risks. International government bonds were rare because foreign investors lacked reliable intelligence regarding political stability, economic health, and government debt servicing capacity. The Rothschild network resolved these problems by establishing the world's first genuine international market for government securities. Their intelligence network could accurately assess political risk in any European nation. Their coordinated operations could seamlessly handle currency conversions and international payments. Their privileged relationships with multiple governments provided credible assurance that loan terms would be honored. Even if political regimes changed hands, James established standardized procedures for evaluating government loan applications that became the functional foundation for modern credit analysis. Applicant governments were required to submit detailed data on their revenues, expenditures, existing debt obligations, military requirements, and political stability projections. Rothschild agents independently investigated these claims through their proprietary sources. Loan terms were structured to accurately reflect actual risk levels rather than being dictated by diplomatic considerations. This rigorous, systematic approach allowed the Rothschild network to price government loans more accurately than traditional banks, which often based lending decisions on political favors rather not financial reality. Governments with sound finances could borrow at favorable rates through Rothschild markets. Governments with questionable credit paid higher interest rates that precisely reflected their actual risk profile. This pricing precision created overwhelming competitive advantages. Rothschild banks could offer superior terms to creditworthy governments while simultaneously avoiding catastrophic losses on loans extended to unreliable borrowers. Traditional banks, unable to analyze credit risk as effectively, either lost profitable business to the Rothschild competition or incurred heavy losses on defaulting government loans. James's government bond operations also generated significant intelligence value beyond their direct financial returns. Government loan applications divulged detailed data regarding national finances, political vulnerabilities, military capabilities, and economic development plans that could not be obtained through other sources. This intelligence enabled the Rothschild network to make superior investment decisions while simultaneously providing valuable information that could be sold to other clients. By 1816, the Rothschild banks were coordinating government borrowing for Britain, France, Austria, Prussia, and numerous smaller European states. The network's market share in international government finance surpassed 60%, a level of dominance no financial institution had ever achieved across multiple national markets. The resulting profits were staggering. James estimated the family's annual income from government bond operations alone exceeded 10 million francs, equivalent to roughly $50 million today. But more significantly, these operations established the Rothschild network as the central mechanism through which European governments financed their most critical functions. Officials needing funding for major national projects consulted Rothschild banks regarding market conditions and loan structures. Political leaders considering policy changes that might affect national creditworthiness sought Rothschild counsel regarding the financial repercussions. Diplomatic negotiations involving economic components included Rothschild representatives to evaluate financial feasibility. The network had achieved something unprecedented in European history, a private financial institution that exerted influence over state policy through its absolute control over international credit markets. Political leaders might command armies and enact laws, but they required Rothschild approval to finance their most ambitious initiatives. James was no longer merely a banker. He was a financial statesman whose decisions could determine the success or failure of governments in their most essential objectives. The Jewish refugee who arrived in Paris during Napoleon's Russian retreat had become one of the most powerful individuals in post-Napoleonic Europe. Yet, the greatest opportunities still lay ahead. As James prepared to use his financial influence to reshape European economic development through the emerging Industrial Revolution, by 1817, France faced a fiscal cataclysm, a 700 million franc reparation debt that exceeded its total annual revenue. Traditional banking had failed. The nation was on the brink of sovereign default. James stepped in, not as a mere lender, but as a financial architect. He pioneered the world's first liquid international market for government securities, allowing French bonds to be traded in London, Vienna, and Berlin simultaneously. This mechanism didn't just stabilize France. It subjected national policy to international credit oversight. For the first time in history, the sovereignty of a great power hinged on its credit rating, managed exclusively by the Rothschild network. The French central bank was politically constrained and unable to supply funding that might be construed as favoring particular political factions. French finance minister Louis-Emmanuel Corvetto approached James with a proposition that was both an unparalleled opportunity and a severe threat. Would the Rothschild network agree to become France's primary source of international credit, effectively supplanting all traditional French financial institutions as the government's principal banker? The scope of the request was staggering. Corvetto was asking James to coordinate all French government borrowing in international markets, manage currency exchanges for reparations payments, handle diplomatic transfers related to occupation expenses, and provide continuous credit lines for routine government operations. The total financial responsibility would exceed 500 million francs annually, granting James more operational importance to the French government than any sitting cabinet minister. For James, the proposal represented the ultimate vindication of his strategic vision. 3 years prior, he had arrived in Paris as a young foreign banker with immense ambition but limited means. Now, the French state was offering to make him their single most important financial partner, with responsibilities surpassing those of the entire treasury. Yet, the opportunity carried enormous risk. If James accepted primary responsibility for French government finance and the arrangement failed, he would bear the blame for France's economic ruin and potentially face political persecution, or worse, if he succeeded but France's political stability deteriorated, he might be viewed as an enabler of unpopular policies. If other European powers disapproved of his arrangement with France, he could lose access to the critical international markets essential to all Rothschild operations. James's response demonstrated the advanced political analysis that defined Rothschild decision-making. He agreed to serve as France's primary international banker, but only under conditions that protected his broader European relationships while maximizing his leverage over French policy. First, James insisted that his arrangement with France be explicitly defined as a commercial relationship, not a political alliance. He would provide financial services for competitive compensation, but he would not be perceived as a partisan supporter of any specific French political faction. This principled neutrality allowed him to maintain relationships with French opposition groups while preserving his necessary credibility with other European governments. Second, James demanded that French officials synchronize their borrowing requests with coalition governments to ensure that his services to France did not clash with his obligations to other major clients. This requirement subjected French financial policy to external international oversight, but it also freed James from being forced to choose between conflicting loyalties. Third, James mandated that the French government provide him with continuous, detailed information regarding their political and economic plans so that he could accurately evaluate risks and structure financial arrangements appropriately. This intelligence access instantly made James one of the best informed individuals in Europe concerning French government activities. The arrangement James negotiated with Corvetto established fundamental precedents that would govern government-banker relationships for decades. Instead of conventional loans with rigid, fixed terms, James created flexible credit lines that could be dynamically adjusted based on rapidly changing political and economic conditions. Instead of simple interest payments, he structured compensation packages that included layered fees for diverse services, currency exchange, international transfer execution, market analysis, and political risk assessment. Most significantly, James established the principle that major government borrowing required international coordination through specialized institutions capable of managing complex multinational financial arrangements. Traditional banks, operating within single national borders, could not handle the sophisticated transactions required by modern states for international obligations. The first major test of this new arrangement occurred in September 1817, when coalition forces demanded immediate payment of a 150 million francs reparations installment. French treasury officials had assumed they could delay payment through diplomatic maneuvering, but coalition commanders refused to extend the deadline and threatened to impose punitive additional occupation costs if payments were late. James arranged the required payment within 2 weeks through a complex transaction involving 4 separate currencies and 6 different national markets. French government bonds were sold to British investors for pounds sterling, which were converted to Austrian currency through the Vienna market, then exchanged for Prussian thalers via Berlin operations, and finally converted to French francs for delivery to coalition representatives. The transaction required synchronization between multiple Rothschild banks, careful timing to exploit favorable exchange rates, and sophisticated hedging operations to guard against currency fluctuations during the 2-week settlement period. Traditional banking houses would have needed months to organize a similar payment, and the costs would have been substantially higher because they could not coordinate international operations as effectively. The successful management of the September payment solidified James's credibility with both French officials and coalition commanders. French ministers realized that Rothschild Financial Services offered solutions to problems that had appeared insoluble through conventional channels. Coalition representatives discovered that James could guarantee payments that they had seriously doubted France could deliver. More critically, the arrangement demonstrated that effective modern governance necessitated international financial capabilities that traditional national banking systems could not provide. Countries limited solely to domestic financial resources would be perpetually unable to meet their international obligations. Governments that could access international credit markets through sophisticated banking networks would possess enormous advantages in managing both domestic and foreign policy. James had positioned himself at the very epicenter of this transformation. European governments requiring international financial services found the Rothschild network to be their only viable option. Political leaders seeking to pursue ambitious policies that demanded substantial funding discovered they needed Rothschild approval to access the international credit markets. By 1818, James was managing over 60% of French government borrowing and had become the single most important source of international credit for the Bourbon monarchy. His Parisian offices processed more international financial transactions than the French treasury itself. His political intelligence was consulted by French ministers who needed to understand how their policies might jeopardize their ability to secure international funding. The Jewish banker, barred from his ancestral home by anti-Semitic laws, had become utterly indispensable to the French government. Supposedly, the standard-bearer of Catholic European civilization, the refugee who fled persecution was now consulted by kings and ministers who depended on his financial backing to maintain their political authority. France had been rescued from bankruptcy, but the cost was accepting that the nation's economic sovereignty now hinged on the cooperation of international financial networks operating beyond traditional government control. By 1820, James Rothschild's fundamental reshaping of European finance was complete. The family banking network controlled an estimated 50% of all international government lending, managed currency exchanges valued at over 200 million francs annually, and operated intelligence services that influenced policy decisions in every major European capital. Traditional banking houses had been relegated to handling routine domestic transactions, while the Rothschild Empire asserted its dominance over international finance. The root cause of this dominance was not merely superior capital, but superior organization. While other banks remained confined to single-country operations, the Rothschild network functioned as a seamlessly integrated international system. When the British government needed to transfer subsidies to continental allies, they used Rothschild services because no British bank could efficiently manage the complex multi-currency transactions. This dominance sometimes made them more vital than the central banks themselves. In 1825, when the Bank of England was completely drained of its gold reserves and teetered on the brink of collapse, it was Nathan who coordinated with his brothers to ship gold from across Europe. Within weeks, the crisis was averted, leading the British government to call him the Commander-in-Chief of the City of London, a banker who commanded capital as kings commanded nations. When Austrian officials required financing for vital infrastructure projects, they turned to Rothschild banks because no Austrian institution could effectively access international capital markets. James's Paris operation had permanently become the central repository for European financial intelligence. His agents tracked government revenues in every major country, monitored political shifts that might affect credit ratings, analyzed macroeconomic conditions that could impact currency values, and evaluated military scenarios that might influence government borrowing needs. This colossal information base was synthesized into comprehensive reports sold to investors, government officials, and commercial enterprises across the continent. These intelligence operations generated immense revenues. Separate from traditional banking profits, European governments paid substantial fees for reports detailing economic conditions in neighboring countries. Investors purchased market analysis that incorporated political intelligence unavailable from rival sources. Commercial enterprises acquired assessments of business conditions in foreign markets where they were considering expansion. But James's most profitable innovation was his creation of secondary markets for government securities. Traditionally, government bonds were purchased by investors who held them rigidly until maturity, receiving fixed interest payments and principal repayment after several years. There was virtually no mechanism for selling government bonds prematurely, meaning investors needing liquidity could not access their capital until the bonds matured. The Rothschild network pioneered the world's first liquid international market for trading government securities. Investors holding British government bonds could sell them instantly through Rothschild markets and receive immediate cash. Investors seeking to purchase Austrian securities could acquire them through Rothschild operations without directly engaging with Austrian government officials. Investors who wish to convert holdings in one country's bonds to another country's securities could arrange the exchange through Rothschild intermediation. This secondary market activity generated multiple revenue streams for James's operations. The network collected commissions on bond sales, fees for currency conversions, charges for market analysis, and arbitrage profits extracted from temporary price discrepancies between different national markets. More crucially, the sustained trading activity provided continuous, high-fidelity information regarding investor sentiment, political risks, economic trends, and financial flows, which significantly enhanced the value of Rothschild intelligence services. The establishment of international government bond markets also granted James unprecedented influence over government policy. Officials who recognized that their cost of borrowing depended entirely on investor confidence in their policies had to incorporate financial market reactions into their political decisions. Governments that pursued policies investors deemed risky faced higher interest rates and restricted access to credit. Governments that maintained policies supported by the financial markets benefited from lower borrowing costs and easier access to international capital. James demonstrated this leverage in 1821 when the Spanish government sought loans to finance military campaigns against colonial independence movements in South America. Traditional diplomatic analysis suggested Spain had reasonable prospects of maintaining colonial control. However, Rothschild intelligence indicated that the independence movements were better organized and significantly more financially prepared than Spanish officials realized. Instead of simply refusing the loan, James tailored his response to influence Spanish policy. He offered to provide the necessary funding for Spanish operations, but only if Spain agreed to pursue negotiated political settlements with colonial representatives, rather than relying on purely military solutions. If Spain insisted on military-only approaches, the loan terms would be dramatically more expensive, and the credit limited to shorter periods. The Spanish government initially rejected James's conditions, but quickly discovered that no other international lender could provide adequate funding for extended military campaigns across vast colonial territories. Traditional Spanish banks lacked capital. Other European banks were unwilling to finance colonial wars likely to fail, resulting in loan defaults. After 6 months of fruitlessly seeking alternative financing, Spanish officials returned to James and accepted his conditions. The subsequent loans were used primarily to negotiate political settlements with colonial leaders, rather than finance military actions. Several South American territories achieved independence through negotiated agreements that protected Spanish commercial interests while ending expensive military conflicts. The Spanish colonial arrangement set a precedent that would define Rothschild influence for decades. Governments requiring access to international capital markets were forced to align their policies with financial market preferences rather than purely political considerations. Political leaders might possess military force and legal sovereignty, but they required Rothschild cooperation to finance their most crucial initiatives. This influence extended beyond simple loan approval or rejection. James began incorporating specific policy recommendations into his financial proposals for government clients. Governments seeking favorable loan terms were encouraged to implement policies favored by financial markets. balanced budgets, reduced non-essential military expenditures, improved commercial regulation, and enhanced international trade relationships. Governments that disregarded these recommendations faced higher borrowing costs, restricted credit access, and negative assessments in the intelligence reports James distributed to investors across Europe. Governments that adopted Rothschild policy recommendations received preferential treatment in loan negotiations and positive evaluations in market analysis reports. This systematic approach created powerful incentives for governments to prioritize aligning their policies with financial market preferences over purely political expediency. Traditional European governance had rested upon aristocratic privilege, military authority, and religious legitimacy. James was pioneering a new paradigm where access to financial markets became a critical component of political power. European aristocrats, who initially dismissed James as a nouveau riche merchant, discovered that their governments depended on his cooperation to function effectively. Military commanders who viewed bankers as mere suppliers realized that financial constraints could determine military capabilities more directly than strategic planning. Religious leaders, who had historically considered commercial activities morally suspect, found that their institutions needed access to international credit markets for major construction projects and charitable funding. The ensuing social transformation was as significant as the political changes. European high society, which had traditionally excluded Jewish participation, began actively competing for James's attention and approval. Aristocratic families, needing credit to sustain their ancestral estates, sought invitations to Rothschild social events. Government officials requiring financial cooperation for policy initiatives cultivated close personal relationships with James and his associates. James capitalized on these social shifts to amplify his political influence and commercial opportunities. He acquired estates in prestigious locations, established salons where financial and political leaders could interact informally, sponsored cultural endeavors that attracted influential participants, and cultivated personal relationships that transcended purely commercial transactions. By 1825, James had achieved a level of social and political integration that would have been unimaginable for any Jewish individual in Europe just a generation earlier. The very aristocratic society that had excluded his parents now vied for his approval. The political institutions that had persecuted his community now relied on his active cooperation. This transformation reflected the deeper changes in European society that James had helped accelerate. Traditional sources of power, birthright, military command, religious authority were being supplemented by new forms of influence rooted in financial capability, access to information, and international connectivity. The nascent industrial economy demanded capital, technical expertise, and international coordination that traditional institutions could not supply. James had strategically positioned himself at the center of these changes, transforming personal success into institutional influence that would shape European political and economic development for generations. In 1825, James Rothschild witnessed a technological demonstration that would fundamentally revolutionize his investment philosophy and permanently reshape European economic development. George Stephenson's pioneering steam locomotive, Locomotion No. 1 successfully completed a 26-mile run on the Stockton and Darlington Railway in England, conclusively proving that steam-powered transport could move heavy freight and passengers faster and more efficiently than conventional horse-drawn systems. Most contemporary European observers regarded the railway as an interesting mechanical novelty with limited practical commercial application. Existing transport infrastructure canals, rivers, and road networks seemed adequate for current commercial needs, the enormous capital expenditure required for railway construction appeared disproportionate to the potential benefits, especially given the unproven nature of steam technology and the substantial technical challenges associated with large-scale railway operation. James saw a different reality. The single greatest investment opportunity in European history, railway networks, he realized would fundamentally transform commercial logistics, drastically reduce shipping costs, accelerate overall economic development, and generate financial returns that would dwarf the profits derived from traditional banking operations. More importantly, large-scale railway investment would demand precisely the kind of international capital coordination that the Rothschild network was uniquely positioned to provide. Traditional transportation methods were rapidly reaching their capacity limits as European commerce expanded during the post-Napoleonic recovery. Canal construction was prohibitively expensive and geographically constrained. River transport was limited by seasonal water levels and could not effectively serve landlocked regions. Road systems required massive maintenance budgets and were highly vulnerable to weather disruptions. Railway networks offered simultaneous solutions to all these problems. Steam locomotives could operate reliably year-round in most weather conditions. Railway construction could connect virtually any 2 points, regardless of topographical obstacles. Railway transport moved freight and passengers significantly faster than any alternative system. Railway networks could effectively serve both urban centers and remote regions through coordinated scheduling and interconnected routes. But large-scale railway development required capital investments on a scale that shattered the capacity of traditional financial institutions. A single railway line connecting 2 major cities might cost 10 to 20 million francs, equivalent to roughly $100 million in current money. National railway networks would require hundreds of millions in sustained funding over decades. No single bank or government could finance such massive projects alone. James recognized that successful railway development mandated liquid international capital markets capable of coordinating investments across multiple currencies and countries. British investors might provide initial seed funding, but comprehensive network development would require French, German, and Austrian capital. Italian and Swiss investors might participate in specific segments, but only if their investments were seamlessly coordinated within a broader European railway master plan. The Rothschild network was perfectly positioned to orchestrate these complex international investments. Their deep relationships with government officials could facilitate the regulatory approvals essential for railway construction. Their intelligence services could accurately evaluate the commercial viability of proposed railway corridors. Their financial capacity allowed them to structure investment arrangements capable of attracting capital from multiple national markets simultaneously. James's first major railway venture was his participation in financing the Liverpool-Manchester Railway, which opened in 1830 and instantly demonstrated the commercial power of steam transport. The line generated profits exceeding initial projections by 40%, while slashing shipping costs between Liverpool and Manchester by 60%. Passenger service proved even more profitable than anticipated, with demand often surpassing operational capacity. The success of the Liverpool-Manchester line convinced James that railway investment would become the defining form of European capital allocation for the coming decades. Governments that prioritized extensive railway networks would acquire enormous advantages in commercial development, military logistics, and international trade integration. Regions lacking railway connections would become economically marginalized. Regardless of their other resources or capabilities, James began formulating comprehensive plans for French railway development, designed to serve both commercial and strategic objectives. A robust French railway network could connect Paris with major ports, industrial centers, and border regions, thereby enhancing both domestic commerce and international trade flows. Railway construction would stimulate massive demand for steel, iron, coal, and manufactured goods, accelerating French industrial development. Railway operations would create sustainable employment for thousands of workers, while providing dramatically improved transportation services for millions of passengers and commercial enterprises. However, French railway development faced significant political and financial barriers. The French government was deeply reluctant to authorize large-scale private railway construction, fearing that foreign investors might gain excessive influence over core French transportation infrastructure. French banks lacked the necessary capital for major railway investments and were wary of committing resources to an unproven technology. Traditional French commercial interests, especially those linked to canals and roads, vehemently opposed railway development, fearing competition from a demonstrably more efficient transportation system. James addressed these concerns through meticulous negotiation and strategic compromise. He proposed that French railway companies be structured as joint ventures between French and international investors, ensuring French partners retained majority control, while international partners supplied technical expertise and essential external capital. Railway operations would be regulated by French government agencies, but crucial commercial decisions would be executed by private company management. Most significantly, James offered ironclad guarantees that railway investments would be structured primarily to serve French national interests rather than maximizing foreign commercial objectives. Railway routes would be designed to enhance French military logistics and domestic commerce. Construction projects would employ French workers and purchase materials from French suppliers wherever feasible. Railway operations would be managed by French citizens who understood local conditions and government requirements. The guarantees James provided were credible because his extensive European operations gave him an overriding incentive to maintain robust, positive relationships with all governments where Rothschild banks operated. If French officials believed railway investments benefited foreign interests at France's expense, they could retaliate by restricting other Rothschild activities in France. Conversely, if French railway development succeeded and enhanced French economic strength, other European governments would be more inclined to approve similar Rothschild railway projects in their own territories. James's most innovative contribution to French railway development was his creation of investment structures that successfully attracted capital from small investors as well as major financial institutions. Traditional railway financing was confined to wealthy individuals and established banks that could sustain massive investments in unproven technology. This restriction limited the total available capital and concentrated ownership among a small elite. James designed railway securities that could be purchased by middle-class investors eager to participate in the industrial boom but unable to afford major investments. These securities provided stable returns based on railway revenues while allowing investors to easily liquidate their holdings if they required cash before the railway projects were completed. The democratization of railway investment generated enormous political support for the entire development project. While securing crucial additional capital for construction, middle-class investors who owned railway securities became vocal advocates for government policies supporting railway expansion. Commercial enterprises utilizing the railway services became constituents supporting continued investment. Workers employed by railway companies or suppliers became a political constituency for leaders who championed railway development. By 1835, James was coordinating railway investments exceeding 50 million francs annually, while managing construction projects that employed over 10,000 workers across France. The Rothschild network had established itself as the primary source of capital for European railway development, with operations extending from British railway companies to Austrian transportation projects. These railway investments generated extraordinary financial returns. Annual profits often surpassed 15% of invested capital, while simultaneously creating a strategic influence that enhanced Rothschild power across multiple dimensions. Governments relying on Rothschild-financed railway networks for military logistics and commercial transport became hesitant to pursue policies that might jeopardize their relationship with the Rothschild network. Commercial enterprises dependent on railway transportation became indirect stakeholders in continued Rothschild success. Railway development also yielded invaluable intelligence that complemented traditional Rothschild information services. Railway construction required detailed topographical surveys, assessments of economic resources, distribution of populations, and commercial activities across vast regions. This information proved essential for government planning, military operations, commercial development, and investment decisions that extended far beyond the immediate railway operations. James had strategically placed himself at the heart of the industrial transformation that was rapidly reshaping European economic development. The banking network, originally conceived to manage government financing during wartime, had evolved into an integrated industrial investment system that determined the pace and direction of peacetime economic modernization. By 1840, James de Rothschild had achieved something unprecedented in European history. A Jewish banker from Frankfurt exerted more economic influence than most of the continent's kings and emperors. His personal wealth was estimated at over 600 million francs, equivalent to roughly $3 billion today. But his ultimate power lay not in his personal fortune, but in the institutional systems he had engineered, which were designed to outlast any individual's wealth. The Rothschild banking network now operated in every major European capital, executing more international financial transactions than all other banking houses combined. European governments routinely sought James's advice regarding policy decisions that could affect their access to international credit markets. Railway development across the entire continent relied on Rothschild investment coordination. Commercial enterprises planning international expansion sought Rothschild partnerships to secure effective access to foreign markets. James recognized that personal wealth, regardless of its vastness, remained vulnerable to political upheaval, economic crises, and mortal limitations. Institutional influence, properly structured, could persist across generations and withstand political revolutions that destroyed conventional sources of power. The key was creating systems that made Rothschild services absolutely essential to the functioning of the European economy, rather than merely convenient. His systematic approach to building lasting institutional control was sophisticated and deliberate. Instead of confining Rothschild operations strictly to financial services, James strategically diversified into core industries that supplied essential resources for modern economic development. Mining operations that controlled access to raw materials, manufacturing enterprises that produced crucial industrial equipment, transportation companies that moved goods and people, and insurance services that mitigated commercial risks. Each industry served multiple strategic objectives. Mining operations generated profit from commodity sales, while supplying proprietary intelligence on resource availability that guided broader investment decisions. A prime example of this commodity-driven intelligence was their calculated move into strategic mineral. In 1835, the Rothschilds secured a virtual world monopoly on quicksilver by acquiring the rights to the Almudena mines in Spain. Since mercury was essential for refining gold and silver, this concession gave them a chokehold on the global production of precious metals, turning a raw material into a tool of financial sovereignty. Manufacturing enterprises created revenue streams while establishing dependency relationships with industrial clients who required continuous financial services. Transportation companies produced returns while creating dependencies among commercial users who relied on Rothschild-controlled logistics. The diversification strategy also generated powerful defensive capabilities. Governments contemplating policies hostile to Rothschild interests had to carefully weigh potential political benefits against the severe economic disruption that would result from reduced cooperation with Rothschild-controlled enterprises. Commercial rivals who challenged Rothschild market positions faced potential retaliation across multiple industries, where the network maintained significant leverage. Yet, this hegemony did not go unchallenged by the rise of modern corporate banking. James faced a fierce rivalry with Isaac and Émile Pereira, who established the Crédit Mobilier with the support of Napoleon III. This was more than a business dispute. It was a battle between the old bank of the Rothschilds and a new model of investment banking based on public savings and industrial bonds. While the Pereiras initially threatened James's influence over French infrastructure, overextension led to bankruptcy in 1867, leaving the Rothschild house as the sole surviving giant. James's most critical institutional innovation was his creation of intergenerational wealth transfer mechanisms designed to preserve unified family control while accommodating the diverse capabilities and interests of future generations. Traditional European fortunes frequently fragmented within 2 or 3 generations because inheritance laws divided assets among numerous heirs and failed to enforce coordinated management of family enterprises. The Rothschild system circumvented these problems through meticulous legal structuring that legally separated asset ownership from centralized operational control. Family members received guaranteed income from Rothschild enterprises without gaining individual authority over strategic decisions. Investment planning was managed by specialized professional staff who served the family's collective interests while ensuring operational continuity, irrespective of changes in family composition or individual preferences. Most importantly, James established rigorous educational and cultural expectations to ensure future generations understood their collective responsibilities and possessed the advanced capabilities necessary for effective wealth management. Family members were required to master multiple languages, comprehend international commercial law, maintain relationships with political and business leaders across Europe, and demonstrate specialized competence in specific areas of Rothschild operations before assuming significant managerial responsibilities. The institutional architecture James created was deliberately designed to survive not just individual deaths, but also major political catastrophes. Railway investments were structured through separate legal entities in multiple countries so that political changes in any single nation could not destroy the network's transportation assets. Banking operations were geographically distributed across different national markets, ensuring that regulatory changes in one location would not cripple overall financial capabilities. Government bond holdings were meticulously diversified across multiple currencies and political systems. providing protection against default by any single government, while ensuring continuous access to international credit markets. Regardless of which political party controlled various national governments, intelligence operations were rigorously compartmentalized so that the compromise of any single network component would not destroy overall information gathering capacity. James also understood that long-term survival required proactive management of the social and political tensions inherent in extraordinary wealth concentration. European society was increasingly subject to democratic pressures that challenged traditional aristocratic privilege. Popular movements questioned whether immense private fortunes were compatible with social justice and political equality. His calculated response was to position the Rothschild network as the essential engine for European economic modernization, rather than merely a vehicle for personal enrichment. Rothschild railway investments created employment for hundreds of thousands of workers, while improving transportation services for millions of users. Rothschild industrial enterprises contributed to technological advancements that enhanced overall productivity and living standards. Rothschild financial services facilitated international trade that expanded economic opportunities across national borders. Their capacity to mobilize funds often outstripped the speed of the empires they served. This was most famously demonstrated in 1875, when the British government needed £4 million on short notice to purchase a controlling stake in the Suez Canal. While no government department could approve such a sum in time, the Rothschilds provided the loan in days, securing a vital artery of the British Empire and proving that their network was faster than the bureaucracy of the world's greatest superpower. James strategically encouraged media coverage that emphasized the productive contributions of Rothschild activities, while downplaying purely speculative or exploitative transactions. Public relations efforts highlighted the family's generous contributions to charitable causes, cultural institutions, and social improvement projects. Political relationships were managed to ensure that Rothschild interests demonstrably aligned with broader social benefits, rather than conflicting with popular welfare. This sophisticated strategy was severely tested during the revolutionary upheavals of 1848, when popular movements across Europe challenged existing political and economic hierarchies. Traditional aristocratic fortunes were threatened by demands for wealth taxation, property redistribution, and restrictions on inherited privilege. Many established banking houses faced political persecution or confiscation by revolutionary governments. The Rothschild network not only survived the 1848 revolutions, but actually enhanced its position by providing crucial financial services that revolutionary governments required to fund their operations. Republican leaders who had criticized aristocratic privilege discovered they needed access to international credit markets to finance their political programs. Democratic movements that had opposed foreign financial influence found they needed Rothschild cooperation to manage currency exchanges and international payments. James's unique ability to serve multiple, conflicting political factions simultaneously during the 1848 crisis powerfully demonstrated the institutional resilience he had engineered into Rothschild operations. The network services were too valuable to eliminate and too complex to replace. Regardless of which political movements seized control of various European governments, by 1868, the year of James's death, he had realized his ultimate objective, creating financial institutions that were utterly essential to European economic functioning and therefore immune to the political changes that destroyed conventional sources of wealth and power. The Rothschild network had become a permanent part of the core infrastructure of modern European civilization, as vital to economic development as transportation systems, communication networks, or stable government institutions, the Jewish refugee who had fled anti-Semitic persecution in Frankfurt had constructed a financial empire that commanded respect from the very social and political establishments that had rejected his community for centuries. The young banker who arrived in Paris during Napoleon's disastrous retreat from Moscow had built institutional systems that would influence European development long after Napoleon's ephemeral empire was forgotten. James understood that his greatest lasting achievement was not his personal wealth or social recognition, but the creation of permanent institutional change that would provide security and opportunity for future generations who would never face the acute limitations and dangers that had shaped his own life. He had transformed not only his family's circumstances, but the entire relationship between financial capacity and political authority in modern European society. The institutions James built would continue operating according to the principles he established, serving European economic development while preserving Rothschild influence across generations of intense social and political flux. His true legacy was not the fortune he accumulated, but the robust institutional systems he engineered that made similar fortunes possible for others who grasped how to align private interests with broader social benefits. When one steps back to view the panoramic sweep of James de Rothschild's life, what emerges is more than a simple narrative of individual success. We are witnessing the very genesis of modern international finance. The complex systems he constructed, the regulatory precedents he established, and the institutional reforms he championed did not simply enrich one family. They fundamentally altered the mechanisms by which capital, information, and political power interact in the contemporary world. Today, nearly 180 years after James's passing, the global financial structure continues to function based on principles he pioneered. Multinational banks coordinate intricate operations across numerous countries and currencies. Financial markets wield enormous influence over government policy through bond ratings and capital liquidity flows. Private intelligence networks gather proprietary information that moves markets and shapes high-level political decisions. Investment banking coordinates colossal industrial projects that dramatically reshape entire national economies. The financial integration of the European Union. Now, the mechanics of global foreign exchange markets, international government bond trading, and multinational investment coordination. All these modern systems trace their operational origins directly to the calculated innovations James developed to achieve the Rothschild network's commercial and political objectives. But James's legacy extends beyond mere financial architecture. He definitively proved that outsiders could gain enduring influence within entrenched social and political systems by rendering themselves strategically indispensable rather than seeking direct, confrontational challenges. Jewish communities across Europe gained greater social acceptance and economic opportunities, partly because James demonstrated that financial capacity could override religious prejudice and social exclusion. The same strategy was later adopted by other marginalized groups who used economic achievement as a leverage point to gain political influence and social recognition. American immigrant communities, British colonial subjects, and other European religious minorities, many followed the path James pioneered in successfully transforming economic success into broader social integration. Yet, James's narrative also lays bare the profound moral complexities that inevitably arise when private interests become inextricably intertwined with public welfare. His sophisticated financial services genuinely catalyzed European economic development, but they also concentrated colossal power within private institutions that operated outside traditional democratic accountability. His intelligence networks provided information that helped governments make superior policy decisions, but they simultaneously enabled the deliberate manipulation of financial markets that extracted wealth from less informed investors. The vast wealth James accumulated was partially the result of highly productive economic activities that generated real value for European society, managing government debt, coordinating railway construction, facilitating international trade. These services undeniably contributed to economic growth that benefited millions. But his fortune also stemmed from information asymmetry, calculated market manipulation, and political leverage that allowed him to extract value from economic activities without necessarily creating commensurate benefits for others. This inherent tension between generating private profit and serving the public good remains central to contemporary debates about modern financial systems. Should private institutions be permitted to accumulate the kind of influence James wielded over European governments? Can democratic societies effectively maintain accountability over financial networks that operate internationally beyond the jurisdiction, of any single government? How should we balance the efficiency and innovation provided by private financial markets against the unavoidable concentration of power created by successful private institutions? James's relationship with political authority also established patterns that continue to shape modern governance. He demonstrated conclusively that governments need access to international financial markets far more than financial markets need any particular government. This penetrating insight has become axiomatic in contemporary political economy, where bond rating agencies, international investors, and major financial institutions exert decisive influence over government policy through their control over credit availability. The European sovereign debt crisis of recent decades, financial instability in emerging markets, and the struggles of developing countries with international creditors all reflect the core dynamics that James first identified and ruthlessly exploited during the post-Napoleonic Reconstruction. National government sovereignty remains constrained by the requirements of the financial markets, and political leaders continue to discover that their policy options are limited by their fundamental need to maintain credibility with international investors. Perhaps most importantly, James definitively demonstrated that proprietary information could be transformed into the ultimate source of competitive advantage. His intelligence network proved more valuable than his accumulated capital, his political connections, or his operational capabilities. In our current era of instantaneous digital communication, advanced data analytics, and artificial intelligence, this lesson has become even more critical. Modern financial institutions invest billions in information systems designed to process market data faster than their competitors. Technology companies derive their colossal market valuations primarily from information assets rather than physical resources. Political campaigns increasingly prioritize data collection and micro-analysis over traditional methods of persuasion. James's recognition that information was the single most valuable commodity anticipated the transformations that now define contemporary economic and political competition. The historical narrative of how James Rothschild ultimately rescued France from bankruptcy while subtly controlling Napoleon's wars illustrates timeless themes concerning power, opportunity, and social transformation that remain profoundly relevant across all historical periods. Individuals capable of providing absolutely essential services during times of existential crisis gain leverage that persists long after the immediate crisis has subsided. Institutions that strategically position themselves to serve multiple, competing interests can survive political upheavals that destroy organizations with narrower mandates. Communities excluded from traditional power structures can gain influence through determined innovation and strategic positioning, rather than direct confrontation and with established authority. Economic achievement can overcome deep-seated social prejudice, but only when skillfully combined with political sophistication and strategic patience. Whether one judges James's legacy as net positive or negative depends largely on one's perspective regarding the appropriate role of private financial institutions in modern society. His innovations undeniably fueled European economic development. While simultaneously concentrating vast power in private hands, his intelligence networks facilitated superior decision-making while enabling deliberate market manipulation. His wealth creation generated opportunities for others while establishing precedents for inequality that endure today. The essential lesson is not whether James was a historical hero or a villain. It is that individual achievement within complex social systems inevitably carries profound moral ambiguity. The very capabilities that enable productive contributions to social welfare can also be deployed to extract private benefits at the public's expense. The same innovations that solve pressing societal problems can simultaneously generate new forms of inequality and social tension. Therefore, the critical question that persists is this: in our contemporary global world of integrated financial markets, massive international capital flows, and private institutions that wield enormous influence over public policy, how do we successfully capture the benefits that exceptionally gifted individuals like James can provide, while effectively minimizing the systemic risks that concentrated private power poses to democratic governance and social justice? That challenge, balancing private innovation with public accountability, encouraging productive achievement while preventing exploitative extraction, remains as pressing today as it was when a young Jewish refugee from Frankfurt first arrived in Paris with unlimited determination and the strategic genius to transform personal ambition into institutional change that would irrevocably shape the course of human history.